The mansion was lit like a palace that night, golden chandeliers gleaming through the tall windows, the marble staircase polished until it reflected the crystal lights above. Cars lined the driveway, their engines purring as men in suits and women in glittering gowns stepped out, eager to show off their status and elegance. Inside, the music played softly, violins blending with the hum of wealthy voices, laughter, and the clinking of glasses filled with champagne that cost more than an average person's monthly salary. It was one of those gatherings where appearances meant everything. Every gesture, every smile, every detail of clothing was a subtle competition. Amelia stood at the center of it all, basking in the attention. She wore a crimson gown that hugged her figure and draped into a long, dramatic train. Around her neck was a necklace of diamonds, each stone flawless, catching the light with every movement. Her hair was perfectly styled, swept up with strands cascading down like golden silk. People turned when she passed, not only because of her beauty, but because she radiated confidence, the kind that came from living in wealth and believing herself untouchable. She smiled, accepting compliments as if they were her right, nodding slightly to acknowledge the admiration she knew she deserved. But behind that carefully crafted exterior, Amelia harbored something darker. A bitter taste she could not wash away no matter how much champagne she drank or how many times people praised her. It was her twin sister, Eliza. Born just minutes apart, they had once looked identical, mirror images in childhood, sharing secrets, toys, and dreams. But as they grew older, their lives diverged sharply. Amelia clawed her way into the circles of power and wealth, always chasing attention, always hungry for validation. Eliza, on the other hand, had been the quiet one, preferring books to parties, kindness over competition. She didn't pursue wealth the way Amelia did, and as time passed, her simple clothes and humble lifestyle became a source of shame for Amelia. Now, Amelia rarely spoke of her twin. If she did, it was only to make herself look superior. She relished the idea of people knowing she had a sister, one who was poor, ordinary, and invisible in the glittering world Amelia had conquered. Tonight, as she prepared to raise her glass for yet another toast, Amelia's lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had something planned, a little game. "Have you invited her?" a friend asked, leaning close with a curious smile. Amelia's eyes glinted. "Of course. I thought it would be entertaining." "You'll see." The guests around her chuckled knowingly, as if they were about to watch a stage performance. Amelia loved this moment. Loved the thought of Eliza walking into this dazzling ballroom, standing awkwardly among men in tailored suits and women dripping in diamonds, wearing whatever modest dress she could find. She imagined the whispers, the subtle smirks, the pitying looks. And she, Amelia, would stand there and pretend to be the gracious sister, smiling sweetly while watching her twin crumble under the weight of judgment. It was cruel, but cruelty often disguised itself as entertainment in Amelia's world. As the clock struck 8, the grand doors at the end of the hall opened. The music seemed to hush, as though even the violins were curious. Heads turned. The air shifted. For a brief moment, Amelia felt a twinge of impatience. Then she saw her, Eliza. But she was not the Eliza Amelia had pictured in her mind. Not the timid girl in a thrifted dress, shrinking under the gaze of wealth. Eliza walked in with a quiet confidence that stole the breath from the room. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders in soft waves. Her gown, a deep sapphire silk, flowed like water with each step. Her eyes held a calm strength, and though her makeup was simple, it highlighted her natural beauty in a way that made her glow brighter than the chandeliers. And then there was the man at her side. Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence commanded attention even before people noticed the perfectly tailored tuxedo he wore or the expensive watch that glinted at his wrist. His hand rested gently but firmly at the small of Eliza's back, a gesture protective and proud. His face was strong, handsome, the kind of man others instinctively respected. But it wasn't just his looks that stunned the guests. It was recognition. A ripple of whispers surged across the room like a wave. "That's Nathaniel Cross." Someone gasped. "The billionaire investor." Another whispered. "Yes, the one who built an empire in less than a decade. He's worth." The murmurs filled the air, each revelation louder than the last. People straightened, their expressions shifting from idle amusement to awe. Amelia's smile faltered. For the first time that evening, the attention wasn't on her. It was on Eliza. Eliza, the sister she had mocked, dismissed, hidden from her world. Eliza, who was now walking arm in arm with a man who owned entire skyscrapers, who commanded power greater than most in the room could even dream of. Amelia's glass trembled slightly in her hand. She tried to compose herself, plastering on her signature smile. But something inside her twisted uncomfortably. Eliza met her gaze across the room. There was no malice in her eyes, no triumphant smirk, no bitterness. Instead, there was a calm dignity, as if she had expected this moment, but didn't need it to prove anything. She wasn't here to compete. She wasn't here to mock. She was simply living her truth. And that truth was enough to unravel everything Amelia had tried to build. The guests parted instinctively, making way for Eliza and Nathaniel as they moved deeper into the hall. Heads bowed slightly, voices lowered, and suddenly, Amelia realized she had lost control of the evening. What was supposed to be her grand performance, her stage, had been stolen by the very person she intended to humiliate. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass until she feared it might shatter. The laughter and applause around her now seemed distant, muffled, as though she were submerged in water. For the first time in her life, Amelia was the one standing in the shadows while her sister shone. And deep down, though she would never admit it, she felt something even sharper than jealousy: fear. Because Eliza hadn't just walked into the room with elegance, she had walked in with power, with a man who could buy and sell everything Amelia had ever fought for. And Amelia knew, in that instant, that the balance between them had shifted forever. The night she had planned to destroy her sister's pride had just become the night her own mask began to crack. A hush lingered in the grand hall as Eliza and Nathaniel moved forward together. The air felt electric, as though every eye and every thought in the room had locked onto them, unable to look away. Guests who had moments ago been engaged in light-hearted chatter or sipping champagne now whispered in hurried tones, leaning closer to each other as they stole glances. The presence of Nathaniel Cross had shifted the energy of the entire evening. He wasn't merely wealthy. His reputation carried with it an aura of mystery, authority, and power. The kind of man who could alter the trajectory of industries with a single decision. The kind of man who never attended gatherings like this. Yet here he was, walking beside Eliza with unmistakable devotion, his hand resting lightly at the curve of her back, as though she were the only thing in the room that mattered. Amelia felt her throat tighten. For years she had been the star of these circles, the one who turned heads when she walked in, the one who dictated the flow of attention. Now, without warning, her stage had been stolen. She forced her lips into a smile, desperate to maintain the poise she had perfected, but her chest burned with jealousy, the kind that gnawed at her composure with every step her sister took toward her. Eliza, however, moved with grace that seemed entirely uncalculated. She wasn't flaunting her husband. She wasn't strutting or trying to command attention. If anything, she seemed serene, as though she belonged there all along, as though she had no reason to feel small or inferior. That quiet confidence unnerved Amelia more than arrogance ever could. As Eliza and Nathaniel drew closer, A group of Amelia's friends tried to mask their surprise. One of them, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, leaned in toward Amelia and whispered under his breath, "You didn't tell us your sister married Nathaniel Cross." His voice carried a mixture of awe and accusation, as though Amelia had intentionally hidden this piece of information. Amelia's jaw tightened. "I didn't know," she lied smoothly, though her pulse raced. "It must be a recent arrangement." She added the last word with deliberate distaste, hoping to plant seeds of doubt. But the moment Nathaniel's eyes swept across the crowd, the murmurs silenced again. His gaze was calm, piercing, a quiet reminder that he wasn't merely a guest. He was a man who carried weight wherever he went. He turned slightly toward Eliza, and the look he gave her was one Amelia had never received from anyone, a mixture of reverence, admiration, and something that made the rest of the world fade into insignificance. When they finally reached her, Amelia lifted her chin and feigned warmth. "Eliza, darling," she said, her voice carrying the syrupy tone of false affection. "What a surprise." She let her gaze sweep over her sister's gown with subtle condescension, though inside she hated how beautiful Eliza looked. "And Mr. Cross," she added, extending her hand as though she were greeting royalty. "What an honor." Nathaniel shook her hand briefly, polite but distant. "Thank you for inviting us," he said, his voice deep and steady. Amelia's smile wavered, and for the first time in years, she felt small beneath another person's eyes. She turned quickly to Eliza, eager to regain control. "You should have told me you were bringing someone," she said sweetly, though her words carried an edge. "We would have prepared properly." Eliza tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "You invited me, Amelia. I didn't think I needed to seek approval from my guest." The words struck like a blade wrapped in silk. Guests nearby caught the exchange, their eyes widening with quiet amusement. Amelia's cheeks burned. She wanted to snap back, to remind her sister who controlled this world, but before she could, Nathaniel placed a hand over Eliza's and spoke. "I asked her to come tonight," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hushed air. "I don't usually attend events like these, but when Eliza told me about it, I wanted to be here. I wanted to stand beside her." The words weren't spoken loudly, yet everyone within earshot leaned in, as though witnessing something profound. Amelia felt the eyes of her guests shift toward her again, not with admiration but with pity, maybe even judgment. One of Amelia's acquaintances, a woman draped in emerald silk, gave Eliza a warm smile. "You look radiant, my dear," she said genuinely, her gaze sliding over to Nathaniel with curiosity. "How long have you two been married?" "Almost 2 years." Eliza answered softly, her eyes glimmering as she looked at Nathaniel. "We met in the most unexpected way." Nathaniel's lips curved faintly, his gaze locked onto his wife. "She walked into my life when I didn't even know I was searching for something. Or rather, someone. I thought I had everything. Wealth, success, control, but I was empty. Then she appeared." His words, simple and sincere, landed heavier than any extravagant toast Amelia had given that night. There was no grand performance in them, no attempt to impress. They were raw truth, and they resonated with the crowd in a way Amelia could not compete with. Amelia forced laughter, trying to redirect the attention. "Well," she said, raising her glass, "it seems my little event has turned into quite the celebration for my sister." She glanced at Eliza with a smile so sharp it could cut glass. "I'm glad you finally found stability." It was meant to sting, a reminder of the years Eliza had spent without wealth, without recognition. But Eliza didn't flinch. Instead, she squeezed Nathaniel's hand lightly and answered with quiet grace. "I didn't find stability," she said. "I found love. There's a difference." The remark echoed, and for a heartbeat, silence followed. Then a few guests murmured softly, nodding as though her words had awakened something in them. Amelia's stomach churned. She could feel the shift, the subtle realignment of loyalties and attention in the room. For so long, she had been the symbol of success in her circle. But now, with just a few words, and the undeniable devotion of her husband, Eliza had claimed a different kind of power, the kind that couldn't be bought or staged. Amelia tried again to steal the spotlight. She launched into a dramatic speech about her charity work, her investments, her importance in the community. She gestured broadly, laughing too loudly, trying to command the room as she always had. But this time, her voice seemed to fall flat. Guests listened politely, but their eyes kept wandering back to Eliza and Nathaniel. Some even approached them during Amelia's speech, eager to introduce themselves, to shake Nathaniel's hand, to compliment Eliza's elegance. Amelia felt invisible in her own kingdom. When she finally sat down, flushed and frustrated, she glanced toward her sister, only to find Nathaniel leaning close to Eliza, whispering something that made her smile in that gentle, radiant way Amelia could never replicate. It wasn't just the smile of a woman admired. It was the smile of a woman loved, cherished, seen for who she truly was. Amelia's chest tightened painfully. For years, she had equated worth with wealth, believing love was something to be earned through status and appearance. But as she sat there, clutching her glass with trembling fingers, she realized she had never been looked at the way Nathaniel looked at Eliza. Not once. Around them, the party continued. Music swelled again. Laughter returned, glasses clinked. But for Amelia, the night had lost its shine. She had invited her sister to be mocked, to be diminished. Instead, Eliza had arrived with a presence so undeniable that Amelia's carefully crafted world was cracking. And as the hours passed, Amelia could not shake the truth pressing against her chest like a weight. She was no longer the queen of this world. She was a woman slowly being eclipsed by the twin she had underestimated all her life. The night wore on, but Amelia could not shake the sense that everything she had built for herself was slipping through her manicured fingers. The ballroom still glittered with chandeliers and golden light. The music still swelled in elegant waves. But she no longer felt like the center of it all. For years she had reveled in the adoring gazes of her guests, in the way people hung onto her every word, eager to be in her orbit. Now, they gravitated toward Eliza and Nathaniel as if drawn by an invisible current. It started subtly. A few guests drifted to their side, drawn by curiosity and the magnetic presence of Nathaniel. A prominent investor, Amelia, had been courting for months, excused himself from her table with a polite smile, and made his way toward Eliza. Shaking Nathaniel's hand firmly, introducing his wife to Eliza as if they were equals. A famous socialite, Amelia, had fought to impress all evening, laughed at something Eliza said, her expression warm and genuine, not the artificial smile usually reserved for such gatherings. One by one, they shifted, until Eliza and Nathaniel had become the true centerpiece of the gala. Amelia sat stiffly at her table, her glass of champagne untouched, her face frozen in a practiced smile that felt more like a mask with every passing second. She had orchestrated this entire event to elevate her own image, to cement her reputation as the glittering star of her social circle. Instead, she was being overshadowed by the sister she had invited to mock. Her friend leaned over, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Amelia, I must say Eliza is extraordinary. And Nathaniel, my goodness. Do you realize how significant his presence here is? The fact that he's showing himself publicly, and with her, it changes everything." Amelia's jaw clenched so tightly her teeth ached. She's still the same girl who worked in a dusty bookstore. She hissed under her breath, "Don't let her fool you." But even as she said it, She felt the hollowness of her words. Eliza wasn't the same. She had grown, blossomed into a woman who radiated dignity and grace, not because of wealth, but because of who she was at her core. And Nathaniel's love only amplified it. The billionaire spoke sparingly, but when he did, every word carried weight. Guests leaned in when he mentioned how Eliza had once helped him when no one else dared. How she had shown him kindness without knowing his name or fortune. He told the story with reverence, painting her as the anchor that had given his life meaning beyond money. And Eliza, far from basking in the glory, listened quietly, occasionally brushing her hand against his, her humility disarming those around her. It was a kind of power Amelia could never wield, one born not from wealth or intimidation, but from authenticity. At one point, Amelia could bear it no longer. She rose from her chair, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, and approached her sister. The crowd parted slightly, sensing the tension like electricity in the air. Amelia's smile was radiant, but her eyes glimmered with restrained fury. "Dear sister," she said, her voice loud enough to capture the attention of those nearby. "You've truly surprised us all tonight. I must admit, I never imagined you would arrive with such distinction. It seems life has finally smiled upon you." Eliza turned to face her, her expression calm. "Life has always smiled on me, Amelia. Just not in ways you chose to notice." But the words were soft, but they cut sharper than any blade. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Amelia's painted smile flickered, faltering for just a moment. She wanted to retort, to regain control, but Nathaniel spoke before she could. "I don't usually make public appearances," he said evenly, his gaze fixed on Amelia. "But tonight I wanted to. Because Eliza is not just my wife. She is the person who gave me back my humanity. She is my greatest success, far greater than any company or fortune I've built. I wanted the world to see that." The declaration struck the room like a thunderclap. For a moment, no one moved. Then murmurs swelled into admiration, applause even, not for Nathaniel, but for Eliza. The guests looked at her as if she were royalty, but royalty crowned not by wealth, but by love. Amelia's heart pounded violently in her chest. She felt heat rising up her neck, a suffocating mixture of humiliation and rage. This was supposed to be her night, her triumph. Instead, she was standing in the ruins of her own vanity. She tried again to laugh it off, tossing her hair back and letting out a brittle chuckle. "Well, isn't this just a fairy tale? Who would have thought? Our Eliza, married to a billionaire." Eliza's gaze softened, not with pity, but with quiet strength. "It isn't a fairy tale, Amelia," she said. "It's real. Because unlike you, I never measured worth by money or titles. Love came to me not because I sought power, but because I chose to be true to myself." The silence that followed was unbearable for Amelia. The guests were watching, judging, weighing every word, and she knew they had already shifted their loyalties. She had lost. Her hands trembled as she turned abruptly, excusing herself under the pretense of needing air. She stepped out into the cool night, her heels clicking against the stone terrace, the laughter and music behind her sounding distant and cruel. She gripped the edge of the balcony, staring out at the dark gardens, her reflection faint in the glass doors. For the first time in years, she felt small, utterly, devastatingly small. Memories clawed at her. The way she had mocked Eliza for her simple clothes, the way she had dismissed her kindness as weakness, the way she had convinced herself she was the superior sister. And yet, in this single night, all of it had crumbled. Eliza had walked in with nothing but grace, and Amelia's empire of pride had collapsed. Behind her, the party roared on. But it was no longer her party. It belonged to Eliza, the sister she had underestimated. Later, when the night drew to a close, Amelia stood in the shadows of the ballroom as Eliza and Nathaniel prepared to leave. They moved together like a pair carved from the same soul, their hands entwined, their smiles quiet but unshakable. Guests flocked to bid them farewell, to offer warm words, to ask for future introductions. Amelia watched unseen, her chest hollow, her diamond necklace suddenly feeling heavy and meaningless around her throat. Eliza approached her before leaving, pausing just long enough to look her in the eyes. There was no triumph in her expression, no cruelty, only that same calm strength. "You invited me to be mocked," Eliza said softly, so only Amelia could hear. "But I came to remind you, true worth isn't measured in gold or glass. It's measured in love, in how we treat the people around us. You may have everything, Amelia, but until you understand that, you'll always feel empty." Amelia opened her mouth, but no words came. Her throat tightened, her eyes stung, and before she could gather herself, Eliza had turned away, her husband's hand slipping into hers. As they walked out into the night together, the doors closed behind them, and Amelia stood alone, the echoes of their footsteps fading. Around her, the chandeliers still glittered. The music still played, but the illusion of grandeur no longer fooled her. For the first time, she saw her wealth for what it was. Shiny, hollow, and cold. And though she would never admit it aloud, Amelia realized the bitter truth. She had been the one mocked tonight. Not by Eliza, not by Nathaniel, but by the emptiness of her own heart.